Hey guys, Tim K here, back at you with another video. And today I will just be grinding on my hardcore Minecraft world, where I read you guys a pretty scary Reddit story. And guys, I'm not an AI, so at least you guys don't have to listen to an AI voice. And anyways, let's just get into the story. Henry Callum had made this drive so many times, he could have done it half asleep. And on some of the earlier mornings he nearly had. 40 miles out of Centralia, on roads that stopped being roads about 12 miles in, just packed dirt and gravel cutting through the Douglas firs, until the trees pressed so close on either side that the canopy swallowed the sky entirely. He had the grocery bags in the back seat, the paper bag and medications wedged between them, her beta blockers and her blood pressure pills, and the anti-inflammatories she took for her knees. She never gave him enough credit for actually helping. He noticed the equipment. His brake foot slowed the truck, without meaning to. Along the eastern edge of the tree line, maybe a quarter mile off the main road, there were flatbeds parked at angles in the mud, and on them sat the yellow bodies of feller bunchers and skaters. Workers in hard hats moved between them. A temporary chain-link fence had been staked in the ground at intervals, and a white sign with orange lettering had been zip-tied to it. He could not read it from the road, but he did not need to. He knew what it said or near enough. He pressed the gas again and turned down Forest Access Road 14. Her house came into view through the last gap in the trees, just as the road petered out into a wide, flattened clearing of pine needles and root hump earth. His father had built the house over the course of 4 years, sourcing lumber from blowdowns in Savage, and it looked like something that had been grown there rather than been constructed. The roof was steeply pitched and green with moss. The window frames were hand carved with knotwood that Henry had watched his father chisel out on long summer evenings. The whole structure leaned very slightly to the north, the way old trees do, as though it had learned the habit from its neighbors. There was a truck parked alongside the house. Behind it, a silver sedan that was too clean and too new for this road. He grabbed his bags from the back and went inside without knocking. His mother was in her chair by the wood stove, where she was always at, but she was not relaxed. She sat with her spine straight and her cane gripped in both hands across her lap, holding it the way a person holds something when they are considering using it as a weapon. She was 83 years old. Her hair was gone the color of iron filings, and she wore it braided over one shoulder. 3 men stood in her living room. 2 of them wore canvas work jackets, with the company logo on the chest. The third wore a collared shirt and slacks, and held a leather portfolio against his side. "Hello, Henry," his mother said without looking away from the men. "Mum," he set the bags near the door. "What's going on?" The man with the portfolio turned. He had a pleasantly neutral face, the kind cultivated by people who deliver unwelcome news for a living. "Mr. Callum, I am Victor Reese, representing Harwick Timber. These are 2 of our site managers, Burl Haddon and Pete Okafor." He extended his hand, Henry shaking it out of reflex. "We were just explaining the situation to your mother. The state of Washington has granted Harwick an easement through a portion of this land. As a significant part of the acreage your mother holds overlaps with classified public forest. The easement authorizes limited timber harvest operations." "Limited my ass," his mother said. The words came out flat. "Yes, Miss Callum. Limited and regulated. That's actually why we're here. We want to work with you on establishing a boundary, a buffer zone around the immediate property, within which our crews would not operate. We think that's a reasonable compromise, and we'd like to get her input on where that line should sit." Henry looked at his mother. She was looking at the man with an obvious tone of anger. "She doesn't want any of it anyway. Of it," Henry said, "I'm guessing." "I want them off my land," Ingrid spat. "Every tree in the forest is where the gods put. No boundary, no buffer, nothing." Burl Haddon, the larger of the 2 site managers, shifted his weight and looked at their ceiling briefly. "Ma'am, with respect, the easement is already filed. The state's already signed off. We're going to be operating out there regardless of whether we come to an agreement today. The only thing the agreement changes is how close we get to your house. And you'll get as close as you get," she said, "and you will answer for it." Pete Okafor glanced at the lawyer. The lawyer closed his portfolio. "We'll give you a few days to think it over, Mr. Reese said. "We'll be back Thursday to talk further. I hope in the meantime you'll consider that working with us is generally in your best interest, Miss Callum. He nodded to Henry. Mr. Callum. They filed out. Henry watched through the window until a sedan and truck left. Then he pulled a chair over and sat across from his mother. Mum, if they got the easement filed, there's not a lot of room to fight. A lawyer might be able to slow them down, but the state's already decided. I am not hiring a lawyer. I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying that the law is on their side here, and they know it. And they're still trying to negotiate, which means they'd rather not deal with a difficult property owner. That's leverage. You could use it. I have my own leverage, she said. He studied her face. There was something in it that he recognized from childhood, a particular quality of patience that meant she had already decided on a course of action and was simply waited to be asked. What does that mean? She put both hands on top of her cane and pushed herself to her feet with the slow, deliberate effort it always cost her now. Come, she said, I will show you. He followed her out back to the house and into the trees. She walked with the cane, driving into the needle-covered ground, at each step her pace steady, if not fast. Henry walked beside her and said nothing. The forest closed over them immediately, the way it always did, the temperature dropping a few degrees, and the sound of everything flattening under the weight of the canopy. They walked for perhaps a quarter of a mile. He was watching the ground to make sure she didn't catch her cane on a root when he noticed the clearing and stopped. It was a rough circle, maybe 30 feet across where the trees stand, and the undergrowth had been cleared back to the bare earth. The clearing was not natural. He could see where the branches had been removed and where the soil had been turned at the perimeter. A series of markings ran along the boundary, pressed into the earth or scratched into the bark, none of which Henry recognized. In the center of the clearing lay the stag. It had been dressed out with considerable care. The hide was gone, the body had been opened, and the organs arranged in some pattern he could not parse. The skull had been cleaned and positioned in the center of the distributed organs to face a particular direction. And from the eye sockets and from between the tines of the antlers, clusters of small brown mushrooms were already growing, pale stemmed and dense, as though they had been there for weeks. Henry stood at the edge of the clearing and did not step in. Mum, he said. It is not finished, she said, but it has begun. What have you done? She looked at him the way she had looked at the lawyer, unmoved and angry. I have called for help, she said, from someone older than the laws. Henry took her arm on the walk back, which she tolerated without comment. That more than anything told him how tired she was. In the ordinary way of things, she would have pulled free and told him she was not an invalid. How did you manage all of that yourself, he asked, clearing the stag. Mum, the animal had to weigh 250 pounds. The forest provided the clearing, she said, and there was already a place where the trees had stepped back. As if she knew, she picked her way around a root with the cane. The stag was there too, when I went in the morning, already dead. I think it came to give itself. Deer don't come to give it themselves. You don't know what deer do, she retorted. He kept his mouth closed on that. When they got back to the house, he put water on for tea and unpacked her groceries into the cupboard while she lowered herself back into the chair. The wood stove had burned down, so he fed it a couple of splits from the box beside it. This ritual, he said, what is it supposed to do, aside from maybe drawing in every bear within 10 miles? Her mood seemed to darken. It is an invitation, an old one. What I have prepared will become a host, and the host will wake what life's in this forest. Not an animal, not a spirit in the way you think of spirits. She folded her hands over the head of her cane. A guardian. Something that was here before the first people, and will be here after the last. It will know what the loggers are doing, and it'll drive them out. Drive them out, how? However it sees fit, she said. Henry sat down with his tea and looked at the floor for a moment. Mum, I don't believe in any of this, you know that. I know. But I do believe that you're out here alone, and that there are men with machinery coming, and that you are 83 years old. She said nothing. Please, think about working with them. Even on their terms, you could protect the land around the house. trees you've actually lived with in the rest of it. The state forest, the public land that was never really yours to hold on to anyways. It is not about what is mine, she said. What they're doing is destruction. They come into something that took centuries to become what it is, and they reduce it to nothing for their own greed. Men like that deserve to suffer, the way they make nature suffer. Mum, I will not apologize for meaning it. She coughed, then without warning, a hard racking cough that bent her forward in her chair. Henry was on his feet before he knew it, and he knew he had stood. She held her hand to put her mouth, and when she pulled it away, there was blood, bright and unmistakably a thin splatter of it across her palm. That's it, he said. You need to go to the hospital. Today, right now. We can be in Centralia in under an hour. No. Mum, that's blood. I know what it is. She took a cloth from her pocket and wiped her hand carefully. I'm not leaving this house, Henry. I have known for some time what is happening in my chest. I'm not going to spend whatever time remains in a hospital room. She looked at him steadily. I will die in this house, among these trees. That is not stubbornness. That is the only thing that makes sense to me. He stood there for a moment, without nothing useful to say. Then he sat back down. They talked for another hour about smaller things. The way the creek had shifted course slightly after last winter's rains, a pair of owls she had been hearing at dusk. When he left, he held her face in both hands and kissed her forehead, and told her he would be back Thursday for the negotiation. Come early, she said. On the drive out, he passed the logging site. They had not waited. A section of firs along the eastern tree line had already been felled. The stumps pale and raw looking in the afternoon light, and a skid steer was dragging one of the trunks across the torn ground. Henry watched through the windshield as he drove past. That evening he sat down on the kitchen table with his phone and worked his way through the family. Zach answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the dejected quality of someone with the laptop open in front of them. Henry explained about Ingrid, about the logging, about what he had seen in her hands. Dad, I'm sorry, Zach said. I've got midterms, and then a project that runs right up into spring break. I'll try, I really will, but I can't promise anything before mid-March. I understand, Henry said. Just try. He called Abby next. I get it, she said, before he had finished. I'll try to get up there in the next couple of weeks, but Dad, Mom has been having a harder time lately, and she needs more help than she was needing even a month ago. Your grandmother is coughing blood, Abby. I know, and I want to be there, but I can't just leave Mom without anybody. She has people, Henry said. She has her friends and her church, and frankly, she had made her own choices in her life that she is paying for now, and you know. Dad, don't. I'm not starting anything. You always say you're not starting anything. He came up without any specific frustration of the specific frustration of a man who has the same argument many times and has learned nothing from any of them. David answered before the first ring had finished, as if he had been sitting with the phone in his hand. How bad, he said. Henry told him everything, including the clearing of the woods and the stag and the mushrooms already threading through the clean bone of the skull. When he finished, there was a brief silence. That's Mom, David said, with a kind of settled affection. She's been practicing since before we were born. I'm not surprised she pulled it off. Honestly, I'm not surprised the forest gave her a dead stag. She spent 60 years out there. I don't know how she physically managed it. She's the toughest person either of us has ever known or will ever know, David said. You know that. He paused. I'm going to pack tonight and leave in the morning. I can be there in the early afternoon. Is there room? There's always been room. I'm sure she won't mind you there at all. In fact, she'll probably enjoy your company. I'll keep an eye on her, and I'll drive up to the road every evening before dark to call you and let her know how she's doing. Thank you, David. See you Thursday, he said. She'll be all right till then. The next days passed in the ordinary way of day setters saturated with worry. Slowly and without resolution, Henry worked his route, came home, cooked food, and washed his phone. David called Monday evening from the road. Shh, said Ingrid was stable and in good spirits, and had fed him venison stew and argued with him about religion. Tuesday evening, He called back, shorter this time. She said things were quiet. She had spent an hour outside in the afternoon and came back and looking satisfied about something. Wednesday evening, the phone did not ring. Henry sat with it on the table in front of him until 9, then 10. He told himself the truck might have given David trouble on the dirt road. He told himself the timing had slipped, that David simply lost track of the hour. He went to bed and lay there for a long time telling himself these things. Thursday morning he was in the truck before 6. The drive felt different in the gray early light, the trees closer and darker on either side of the highway, the sky not quite decided on which kind of day it intended to be. He made the turn onto the dirt road and pushed the truck a little faster than was sensible on the loose surface. He smelled it before he saw it. He came around the long bend where the tree line opened up on the logging company's staging area. He stopped the truck in the middle of the road and sat there, with the engine running. The equipment had been destroyed, not vandalized, destroyed. The feller bunches had been overturned and crumbled, as though enormous hands had taken them at both sides and run them. The chain link fence was also down, and in places had been driven into the ground. A skidder lay on its side with its cab caved in, and around it the earth has been heaved upward in lawn ridges. The turf and root mat torn back with the mineral soil beneath as if something of tremendous size and weight had moved through the area repeatedly. The stumps from the felled trees had also been torn out, root masses and all, and flung. He could see 2 of them 40 yards away from the opposite field, resting at angles like rotten teeth pulled from a jaw. There was blood and guts everywhere, a great deal of dark and dried to rust brown in the cold air, covering the ground around the largest pieces of wreckage. There were no bodies that he could see. The forest access road to his mother's house was gone. Where it had run between the trees, the earth had risen in a continuous ridge, 4 or 5 feet high. Dense was torn root and packed soil, stretching as far as he could see into the forest. He put the truck in park and got out and stood in the cold air and looked at it. He retrieved his phone from his pocket. 911, what is your emergency? My name is Henry Callum. I'm on Forest Service Road 14, about 40 miles outside of Centralia. There has been some kind of, I don't know how to describe this, catastrophic damage to the logging operation out here. Equipment destroyed, blood on the ground. I don't see any bodies, but there's a lot of blood. He looked back at the wreckage. My mother's lives 4 miles up this road, and I can't reach her. My brother was staying with her, and I haven't heard from him since Tuesday. Sir, I'm sending 2 units out to your location. Can you stay with your vehicle? My mother is 4 miles up the road, and I haven't heard from her in 2 days. A pause. Sir, I'd strongly advise you to wait for emergency personnel before proceeding. Send them fast, he said, and hung up. The time on his phone read 7:08. He left his truck where it sat and started up the way to his mother's house on foot. After a short distance, the ridge ended and returned back to being a road again. Like the ridge was nothing more than a gate to keep vehicles out. The morning was cold, very bright between the trees. He put his hands in his jacket pocket and walked at a pace slightly faster than he was comfortable. Doing the math in his head, 4 miles on a flat road, called an hour and 20 minutes at a good clip. He would be there before 9. He tried to think about what could have done it. The equipment had not simply tipped over or caught fire or had been struck by a fallen tree. It had been compressed, folded, overturned with apparent force and intention. The fencing driven into the ground, the stumps pulled out the hole and thrown. He ran through the reasonable explanations and found that none of them fit the physical evidence. And when he was done running through the reasonable explanations, he was left with the unreasonable one, which was that his 83-year-old grandmother, kneeling in the clearing in the dark, pressing symbols into earth around a stag skull already threaded with mushrooms. He had told her he didn't believe in it. He had meant it when he said it. The trees were loud around him, louder than they should have been at this hour. A dense, continuous bird song coming from every level of canopy, and under it, the sound of the wind working through the upper branches in long rolling passes, and under something else he couldn't name. A low, irregular rustling from the undergrowth on both sides of the road that didn't quite match the rhythm of the wind. He told himself it was squirrels. He was watching the furrows in the road surface when he saw the movement. Something ahead, at the limit of his vision where the road bent slightly left, a shape upright moving towards him through the forest shadow under the trees. He stepped off the road without thinking and put his back against the nearest fir, a tree wide enough to cover him completely, and he stood there with his heart knocking in his chest and waited. He heard it before he saw it clearly. Barely audible under the ambient noise of the forest, the rapid, irregular rhythm of something running hard, or someone running hard on bad footing. Breath coming in the sharp holes. Then the shape resolved around the bend, and it became a man in a highly visible safety vest, hard hat, gone running down the center of the road, with one hand pressed flat over his mouth. Henry pressed himself against the bark, and he did not breathe. The man was 10 yards away, then 5. He ran past without turning his head. Henry watched him go, and was about to step back onto the road when the root came up. It rose from the road's surface, the way a hand rises from water. The packed gravel splitting along a seam as the root of the diameter of the man's wrist arched up and caught the logger's leading foot cleanly. The man went down hard on his palms and rode. Before he could get his legs under him, the root had thickened and bent, and 2 more had emerged alongside it, winding across his ankles with a slow, deliberate pressure, braiding together, lashing him towards the ground as efficiently as a rope. The logger pulled at them with both hands, got his fingers under one and wrenched. It held. He pulled again, got his upper body off the ground, and the roots simply tightened and pulled back. He made no sound for a long moment, just breathed and pulled and breathed. And Henry watched from behind the tree, and understood that the man was trying very hard to not make any noise. Then the roots clenched tight, enough to make him gasp, and the gasp became a scream, full-throated, uncontrolled tearing out like something physical. The force went silent. The instant scream left him. Every bird, every rustling thing in the undergrowth, every creak of the branch and movement of the wind, all of it stopped simultaneously, as if the switch had been thrown. The silence lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then the sound came from deeper in the trees. It was not a roar. It was not a call. It bore no resemblance to anything Henry had worked for. It was a shrill. It was a vast, and had a quality of resonance that seemed to operate beyond normal sound, passing it through his skull and into his back teeth and down the column of his spine. He felt it in his eyeballs. He felt it in his bones of his hands. His legs floated without consulting him, and he went down onto the road with both palms pressed into his ears, even with his ears covered, and went on and through him, filing up every available space inside him, the way the water fills a vessel. He looked up through the pane of it, eyes streaming. It was on the road ahead of him, 12 feet tall, perhaps more, filling the space between the trees lines with bulk that seemed impossible for its shape. Forearms hung from the enormous shoulders. The upper pair were proportioned like a man's, if a man's arms were each as thick as Henry's torso. They ended in hands, recognizable with fingers and a thumb. The lower pair of arms angled outward from a second set of shoulder joints, set lower on the rib cage, and these did not end in hands. The claws began at the wrist and extended to 8 or 10 inches beyond, black and slightly curved. The same black substance that coated their tips, hung in slow threads from the points and dripped into the road. There was no neck. The skull of the stag sat directly on the shoulders, tines extending upward, 4 feet above the ground, and the bones were no longer white or even gray. It was almost entirely covered in a dense layer of moss and mushrooms. The same small brown-stemmed variety he had seen in the clearing, grown thickly from his eye sockets along the jaw, and the seams between the tines. The black substance oozed from both orbital cavities and thin continuous rivulets. The same moss and mushrooms covered the body, growing in dense mats across his chest and down the arms, through which patches of dark hair pushed in tufts. The legs bent backward at the knee, in the manner of a deer's hind legs, and ended in cloven hoofs that cracked the road surface under the weight of it. Across the distance to the logger and forest strides, the lower claws came in a lateral sweep, that opened the man from hip to shoulder, with a sound Henry would spend a long time trying to stop hearing. The upper hands held him while this happened, then shifted their grip, one hand closing around the man's head, and the other his midsection. It pulled into the opposite direction with a slow, deliberate force that tore the man in half with a sickening squelch. Henry was already moving. He had no memory of deciding to move. He was simply backing up away from the road, one foot behind the other, watching the guardian with each step. Not look at him. It simply pounded the remains of its gill into a pulpy smear on the road. He backed away until the bend in the road took the guardian out of sight. Then he ran. He ran without thinking or pacing or footing, ran. With his arms pumping, his breath ragged in the image in his mind of what he had just witnessed. He ran until his lungs felt like wet paper. His legs had gone from burning to something past burning into a hollow. Shaking uselessness, he went down on both knees in exhaustion, and stayed there with his hands on his thighs and his head hanging. The sound of the forest had come back. That was almost worse. The birdsong, the wind, the low rustling from the undergrowth, all of it resumed, as nothing had interrupted. Loud and layered, continuous, pressing in from every direction. He knelt in the middle of it, and trying to get his breath under control, and looked at his phone. No signal. His hands were shaking. He sat back on his heels, looked up at the canopy, and tried to think clearly. The logger had been running away, which meant there might be others doing the same, which meant the guardian was still active and moving through the area. His mother's house was perhaps a mile further up the road. His mother had summoned the thing, and if anyone knew how to be safe near it, how to communicate with it or redirect it, or at minimum how to stand in its vicinity without being dissembled, it was her. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs held barely. The four sounds rose and fell around him, dense, layered, and too loud, the way crowds are loud in enclosed spaces. He started walking quietly, one foot in front of the other, breathing through his nose, staying near the tree line in case he needed to step off the road quickly. The road curved north ahead of him. He followed it and did not look back. The forest sang around him in an unnatural abundance, and somewhere behind him, in the direction he had come from, something very large moved through the trees. The house was wrong before he was close enough to see the details of it. He knew the stretch of the approach by memory. The way the tree line thinned on the left and the roof line appeared first through the gap in the canopy. The steep pitch of it, the moss. But the moss was different now. It had thickened to a mat several inches deep across the entire roof, and from it grew things that had no business of being there, and the quantity ferns and small shrubs, and the same brown stem mushrooms in dense colonies, all on the ridge beam. The walls had been reclaimed in the same manner, the hand-fitted timber, barely visible beneath the ground, that had spread across every surface. Vines have gone up over the window frames and across the glass. A birch sapling, 6 feet high, had pushed through the boards of the front step. He stood on the edge of the clearing and looked at it. David's car was in the clearing where David had parked it. He was certain of this because he had recognized and made the make of the color, but the tires had all gone flat and sunk to the rims. The rubber had cracked and begun to separate from the wheels. The windshield was filmed with a uniform layer of dust and pollen, and across the hood and roof, debris had accumulated in the way debris accumulates over seasons. Leaves broken down to skeletons, then to fragments, then to a thin dark layer of organic matter from which the small things were already sprouting. The side mirror on the driver's side had been pulled off by a branch and laid on the ground with a season's worth of pine needles blanked across it. He went inside. Every wall of the front room was covered in symbols, not painted, not drawn, carved, cut deep into the wood with something sharp and applied with tremendous patience, covering every board from the floor to the ceiling without a gap, running in rows and columns in spiraling patterns that covered even the ceiling above him and the floorboards beneath his feet. He recognized none of them. The furniture was gone, all of it. The chair where she had always sat, the wood stove, and the box of splits, the table, the kitchen shelves. The rooms had emptied, the bare carved walls. From the cracks between boards, mushrooms emerged in clusters, pale and deliberate, the same variety each time. He went down to the hall, to the bedroom. She was on the floor. He crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to his knees beside her. His hands went to her, but found nothing they were prepared to find. She was on her back, her braid still over her shoulder, her clothes still on their body, though they had half decayed. The fabric thinned and split at the folds. The skin had gone, the soft tissue had gone. What remained was bone, and the desensitated remnants of remnants that cling to bone over long processes of time. Dry tendon at the joints, dark patches of skin at the flat surfaces. Her hands were skeletal. The fingers collapsed, the rings she had worn all his life, sitting in the debris around them. From each eye socket grew a small cluster of mushrooms, brown stem pushing up through the orbital bone in the same patient way that grew from the cracks in the walls. Henry sat back on his heels and looked at her for a long time. He slapped himself across the face. The pain was immediate and complete. Dream was not the explanation. He stood up and went through every room in the house, each one stripped to the carved walls and encroaching mushrooms, each one empty of anything that had made a place where people lived. He went back through the front room and stood in the doorway, looking at David's car sitting in the recovery clearing, and thought about what could have happened to him. Probably the same fate that awaited Henry. He was not lost. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't take the road back to his truck. The garden would definitely find him. There was the ritual site. He did not believe there was anything there that would help him. The ritual had already accomplished what it was built to accomplish. The skull and the sacrifice had already been given up, whatever they contained, but it was the only thing he could think of. That was a specific destination rather than simply moving through the forest trying not to be heard. And he needed a destination to keep himself functional. He stepped off the porch and into the trees. His mother had led him here in the late afternoon 3 days ago, or 3 years ago, or whatever the interval was in real lifetime. The memory was clear in the strange way that memories become clear when the context around them sharpens. Left past the cedar was the split trunk, down the slope to the dry creek bed, then along it for 100 yards. Up the other side, where the ground covered thin. He moved through the intervals, with the forest loud around him, that dense layered birdsong and the wind rush that pressed in from all directions, too abundant, too continuous. He smelled the clearing before he saw it, a dense earth and fungus smell that was separate from the normal forest floor. He moved from tree to tree, and when he was close enough to see the light of the open space through the trunks, he stopped. There was a figure at the edge of the clearing. It was standing at the perimeter of the line where the trees ended, and bare earth began, its back to him. The figure's proportions were right. 2 arms, 2 legs, human height. Henry let out a slow breath. He looked at the figure's shoulders, trying to read them, trying to determine if it was David. If it was anyone from the logging crew who had gone this far and found the clearing. He moved closer from trunk to trunk, and when he was close enough to make out the clothing, something in his chest went tight and strange. The jacket was his. Not like his. The particular faded green of it, the wear on the left shoulder seam, the tear on the right pocket he had been meaning to sew for 2 years. He was wearing his jacket right now. He could feel the collar of it against his neck. The figure at the edge of the clearing was wearing the same jacket from the back, in every detail. David, he said quietly. The figure did not move. He approached it. He was not sure why he kept moving forward. Some combination of exhaustion, necessity, and the specific pull of something that he could not explain and not have a category for it. At 10 feet, the figure was still motionless. At 5 feet, he felt something that had no word for it, a recognition that went below memory, as though he were approaching something that was deeply and specifically known to him from a context that had nothing to do with his waking life. He stood up straight and walked forward. When he reached the figure, he stepped into it, and it was gone. Not gone quickly, gone immediately, between one step and the next, as though it had never had any physical reality to violate. He was standing in the spot where it had stood, at the edge of the clearing, looking out the bare earth, the parameter symbols in the center where the stag skull had arranged organs had been. The center was empty, the skull was gone, the organs were gone. The symbols at the perimeter remained, the arrangements his mother's hands had made in the dark. But the sacrifice itself had been fully consumed. There was nothing left but a dark stain in the earth. The forest went silent.